I call this meeting of the Northeast Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. The time is 5:31. Item 2, new business for possible board action. A, operations. 1, possible action regarding parking use agreement between NEISD and San Antonio Spurs LLC, DBA Spurs Sports Entertainment, SS&E. Mr. Clary.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Gottardy, executive staff, and guests. Since 2011, we have had a parking agreement. It was originally with Gordon Hartman and the SOAR organization, and then when the Spurs purchased the soccer team, it converted over to them for the parking agreement. It recently expired in August of this year. We're coming to you tonight to approve a new agreement. It's basically the same agreement we had last time, except this time we will receive an annual donation of $30,000 to the foundation from the organization in lieu of parking. So we ask for your approval on this agreement. It's a 5-year agreement with the option to renew for 3 years, and then we can go back and renegotiate if we need to.
Okay, and you said it's an annual donation?
Annual donation of $30,000 to the foundation.
Were there any donations in the past?
No, ma'am. This is new.
So awesome.
Yes.
Congratulations. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this?
What's the terms?
It's 5 years with a 3-year renewal.
What the start and end dates?
It starts as soon as the agreement is signed, and for 5 years, 22? And then 3 years, then they can renew for 3 years after that.
23.
So it's immediately, it expired the 31st of August, so
Okay.
it'll
September 1, I guess.
be effective upon your
Today.
approval.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Anybody else? Did you want to say something? It looked like you were going for the mic.
The only thing I want to say is I want to thank Ron and his staff for working on this particular agreement. This is a huge success for the Northeast School District, that we went from not getting anything with this parking agreement to now we're going to get $30,000 a year that go to the Educational Foundation, at which time there will be opportunities for Ms. Funk and her staff at the athletic department to go through the Educational Foundation and submit grant applications. But just the idea that we're going to be receiving money for the Northeast School District for something that is long overdue. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. It is great. Do I have a motion to approve the agreement with San Antonio Spurs LLC, DBA Spurs Sports Entertainment?
So moved, and great job.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Trevino. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the motion carries. Item 3, 2019 Legislative Agenda Workshop. Ms. Caldwell. I'm guessing. I don't see my agenda item, sorry. I just haven't gotten there yet. It didn't say, but I'm guessing.
Turn it over to Deb.
Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Gottardy, executive staff, and friends. Tonight we're bringing forward a discussion about the 2019 legislative agenda. Our why for tonight is that a legislative agenda that's adopted by the board helps staff in the district when it comes time for bills to be moving through the process. It gives us guidance on your positions on high-level items and helps us as we are talking with elected officials in the Capitol. It also helps us to align with other school districts. My counterparts in other districts around the state share the legislative agendas, and where we can collaborate, we do, because we believe that there is a greater force in numbers. So things to consider while we're talking this evening is, what are your non-negotiables as a board? What are the things that you care about the most? And at the same token, what is probable? What has a chance of passing in the session? What's a doable item? How can we keep items simple and flexible to give staff the most flexibility when bills start moving through the process? And how specific to Northeast ISD should the priorities be? Do you take more of a global public education focus, or do you set something up that's specific to Northeast ISD but may not help the broad range of school districts in Texas? So when we bring you a legislative agenda, it typically falls into 3 key areas. It's organized under these big categories of school finance, accountability or assessment, and governance and local control. The goal is to develop priorities that will funnel down into good state policy that is right for public school children in Texas. So starting with school finance, one of the big rocks in that funnel, I want to share with you a quote from Governor Abbott. He recently had an opinion piece in the Dallas Morning News, and he talked about the need for school reform and also the need to increase the state's responsibility in funding public education. So that's a little bit of the context that we're going into the session with. To give you a little bit more background on school finance, no one can agree on the real cost of education, and no one can agree on how much it costs to fully fund schools. And that's really why we are in this paralysis in reforming the school finance system. Even the Texas School Finance Commission can't agree among themselves on those first 2 bullets. And it's not a party issue. It doesn't depend on whether you are an R or a D. Sometimes the Senate doesn't agree with the House within the same party. So each group has their own approaches, and it really does cause, again, paralysis on moving forward because we can't agree on some of the big essential questions of how much does it cost to adequately educate a child in Texas? Everybody wants property tax reform. Everybody is talking about it. Not everybody has a solution on how to accomplish that. And the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor have both also talked about recapture over the last year and how we need to reform that in the state. So that gives you some context of the school finance discussion. And so now we're bringing forward to you some recommendations for proposed priorities. That first bullet is broad enough to react to any changes that we might want in this system as bills start moving forward. It would give us enough flexibility to react to inflation adjustments or adjustments to the weights that currently exist in the formulas. If this is a priority that you adopt, again, I'm talking about that first bullet, a white paper, which would be a descriptive 1-page document, could go into some examples of the types of weights and adjustments that we're asking for. The second bullet is focusing on that shift that happens in the state when local property tax collections rise and the state decreases its support. So TEA just last week provided their legislative appropriations request, and Commissioner Morath predicted that the state share will probably drop to the mid-30s because they are accounting for another increase in property tax values. If we just invested the money that was collected for public education back into public education rather than the state reducing its share, we would be much better off than we are today. That second bullet is not easy to accomplish because the state does have to make up that revenue that it counts on with property tax growth, and that now is that third bullet, is how do we identify new sustainable revenue sources? Now this is sticky. The Commission on School Finance Reform has working groups that are subgroups of the overall commission that's supposed to be studying specific areas, and there is a revenue group, and I think they've met for a total of 30 minutes over the year, and the report's due in December. Revenue sources are definitely up in the air. We can't agree as a state on new sustainable revenue sources. There has been discussion about closing tax loopholes. There's been discussion about indexing gas taxes, which school districts get 25% to the available school fund from the gas tax. There's been other discussions as well. You might hear consumption tax mentioned, but we just can't seem to agree on a revenue source. So this one is the least certain of how the state, in my mind, is going to go, because without any input from that revenues working group, I can't even really provide you direction on what is the most favorable option at this time. The last one you've seen before, that was an item that you submitted to TASB as part of their advocacy resolution call, and that's the study on the growth and recapture payments in districts across Texas.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, Deb.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
So support the investment of all current revenue dedicated to education. I remember years ago when the lottery came into play, it was mentioned that, oh, we need this, and the money is gonna go towards education. What's our position on that revenue?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Brian Moy, I thank you in advance to all my subject matter experts out in the audience, but the lottery contributes about $1 billion to school finance in Texas. Certainly not enough, and it does not, fund the whole system. So it still is going into the pot, so to speak, but
Okay.
it all gets mixed into general revenue. So as our property tax growth rises, the state reduces their share to school finance in Texas. So if lottery collections grew, if gas tax collections grew, if property tax collections grew, it doesn't necessarily mean that we get all those dollars. It just means that the state then kicks in less from GR.
So the lottery contributes $1 billion, but it just goes into the general fund. It doesn't go directly and solely for education.
I'm gonna let Mr. Moy.
Thank you. If you look at the state budget, if there's $1 billion of lottery proceeds, you will see that $1 billion specifically in the budget in Article 3, education. But what will happen is then the state will go, well, I don't need to grab as much sales tax money and give it to Article 3 under general revenue. So yes, you can dedicate 100% of lottery to education, but that doesn't mean you're going to make the entire education pot bigger.
Thank you.
Mrs. Williams, 30 years ago, I think the lottery was sold to Texas taxpayers all over the place, that it would take care of educational funding. And bottom line is, there's not even close to enough money that comes in lottery proceeds to take care of public school funding.
Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on with a few other school finance proposed priorities. In 2015, the legislature provided additional funding to improve pre-K programs. It was through a grant process, but those funds were stripped away in 2017, and the requirements remained. So we have been asked to comply to the same standards without any additional funding, and to report on how we are complying with that. So we are suggesting that the state should adequately invest in pre-kindergarten programs, and that formula could be adjusted to meet the standards that exist now. Oppose restrictions on the use of funds tied to a specific allotment or program. Just to give you some quick examples, we get a pre-K allotment as an example. We get a comp ed, compensatory education allotment. How we spend those funds are restricted. It's not just into the coffers for you to use at your discretion as a school board. They have to be dedicated to certain programs and projects and requirements. So if we were to oppose restrictions on the use of funds, it would give you as a school board greater flexibility in funding the budget. The last one was included in the 2017 legislative agenda. This is a priority that allows us to respond to vouchers, education savings programs, any type of word that they use to describe a program that diverts public tax dollars to private schools. Any questions about school finance? I'm going to move on to,
Deb, can I ask, there was just this past week, and I don't know, maybe Brian too can help on it, that the TEA was, has stated now that because of increased property taxes, that the state will be cutting $3.5 billion in funding to education.
yes, so that is definitely part of this second bullet, support the investment of all current revenue dedicated to education. The state is simply proposing to reduce its share because of expected property value growth. Absolutely. So Commissioner is predicting that will translate to about a mid 30% share, and the rest is coming from local taxpayers. And that would be across the district, not just Northeast ISD.
So that's a message that we really need to get out to our taxpayers, that their money is not going where they think it is. Yeah.
I definitely have seen a lot of shares about that article on social media, so I am at least hopeful that that message is getting out.
Right. Thanks.
Moving on to accountability, in case you weren't sure, it is the fairest accountability system Texas has ever used, according to our friend Commissioner Mike Marath. So giving some backgrounds, that again, some of this you heard last week in Mrs. Chichi's presentation, but the final rules weren't released until July. That there were more than 2,600 data points that made up Northeast ISD's letter grade. Campuses will receive their letter grades next year, but we certainly can use their numeric scores now to draw that conclusion. And poverty continues to play a role in the accountability system in Texas. So one of the proposed priorities would be to support adjustments to the state's accountability system to make sure that it accurately reflects the performance that's happening in the schools across Texas. Examples of this could be modifications to the College and Career Military Readiness Indicator, CCMR. We see in that indicator that graduation rates, STAR, are not weighted equally. And we also in that indicator recognize dual credit courses differently. Some dual credit courses receive 1 point and others receive just half a point. So those would be two things as an example that we would support as an adjustment. But again, as bills move through the system, this priority would give us enough flexibility to respond to bills that are moving through the legislative process that might be specific to a revision to the accountability system. Individual graduation committees were first adopted in 2015 and then extended in 2017. It was included in your 2017 legislative agenda and even in your 2015 agenda. These are opportunities for students who do not pass STAR, and now, after the 2017 session, students who do not pass TAX, to show other methods of performance and accomplishment in order to receive a high school diploma. So this is something that we've supported as a district, you have supported as a board over the last few sessions. Another item on here has to do with funding for SAT and ACT test administration. The commissioner has recently released a rule that basically has said that school districts would have to pick up the cost of delivering these tests as a replacement for STAR in high school. So if you have a 8th grade student who's taken Algebra 1 in middle school, they are done with their high school EOC requirement in middle school. But the federal government says they still have to have a high school math assessment. So in the state's ESSA plan, the Every Student Succeeds Act, it says that we as a state will use SAT or ACT scores for their high school state accountability, state administration, but there is no funding for it. The commissioner and TEA has estimated that that will impact more than 100,000 students at a cost of $5.45 million. And so TEA is proposing to pass those costs along to districts. So that is something that we would support in the legislative session, adequate funding from the state to continue the funding of what is a state requirement for those students who take a high school level course in middle school. It's about $50 per test. Moving on to local control. It begins with the adults at the school board meetings, as Commissioner Mike Morath has mentioned. So we want to make sure that the state gives you adequate control to make those good decisions for your local community. As a background, a lot of discussion in the 2017 session had to do with local control specifically at the city level, city government level. But the governor's property tax plan that he released over the interim included school boards along with cities in your ability to tax, to collect revenue, and to call elections. So that is something that we are concerned with. If we would be forced to hold a bond election that obtained a certain voter turnout in order to be valid, that is something that has been discussed, that there would be a minimum percentage of voter turnout to validate a bond election. And we all know how hard it is to get voter turnout in Texas, but that is something that has been discussed. So the first item is one that, again, you submitted to TASB as part of the advocacy resolution process, which is a review of the approval process for charter school expansion to make sure that we're not achieving oversaturation in certain geographic areas. The second one was submitted to the San Antonio Chamber for their Austin legislative agenda, and that would be to grant you the flexibility as a school board to decide what's best in the way of safety and security to meet our local needs. It could be a one-time infusion of funds or ongoing expenses, and it could be everything from facility improvements to mental health resources. Not every school district in Texas is going to have the exact same safety and security needs. One of the things that we're concerned with is that they will utilize the Economic Stabilization Fund, the Rainy Day Fund, for a one-time infusion of money to buy stuff, to buy metal detectors and wands and things like that, so that they can feel good that they've improved safety and security of schools. But we know that as a school board, you best know what's needed to secure our facilities. And it may not be stuff. It may be people. It may be counselors. And so one item of local control would be to provide flexibility in those dollars so that you can best respond to the needs of your community and schools. And this was another one that you have submitted to TASB for a few years related to criminal background checks for school board candidates. Any questions regarding local control? So our next steps for this evening is to try to narrow down those priorities. I provided you with 13 items to consider, to try to narrow those down to 8 to 10, so that we can bring forward a legislative agenda to you October 8th for possible board action. So I'll turn it back over to you.
No, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Okay.
So how would you suggest that we do that? Do we go down each item right now and say, we think this needs to be in it? Or, I mean, do you, I really would like your, because you, to me, are the expert on this.
Sure. I do have a staff top 10 ready to show you if you'd like.
I'd love to see it. And then we'll tell you if we like it or not.
And you can tell me if you like it.
So will that fit? Our white paper was just the front side, or it was front and back last time?
It's front and back is the
Front and back.
legislative agenda.
Okay.
I will make fit whatever is needed. And then there would be individual white papers that go into more depth of the
Okay.
items.
Okay.
So Brian Moy and I sat down and we looked at the school finance items. That was by far the biggest bucket. So we're bringing to you 4 potential priorities under finance. That first one, again, provides the most flexibility. It's supporting adequate school funding. That gives us the greatest amount of flexibility to respond to any needs of our students. Supporting the investment of all current revenue, as Mrs. Hughey mentioned, that is an important item. The state continues to reduce its share, and Commissioner Morath and others rely on that property value growth. We believe that your item that was submitted to TASB and accepted for the conference about studying recapture payments and growth is very important. And I would feel comfortable having a statement regarding any voucher type program that might come up, because I would expect that it does come back around. So it'd be nice to have a legislative item that opposes using public tax dollars for privately run schools. So that's the top 4 under finance. And I do just want to say that while we think other things are important, like pre-K funding, I feel very strongly in that and had some great conversations with Mrs. Borman. If they would adequately fund education, if they would invest the dollars dedicated to education back into public education, Mrs. Borman and her team, who operate on a shoestring budget, would have adequate funds for pre-K. We certainly can still advocate for pre-K funding under either of those 2 bullets, those top 2 bullets, as an example of a program that deserves funding in Texas. Are you have enough information to move on to accountability?
Does anybody have any comments or questions about these 4?
I think those 4 are fair.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Thank you.
So accountability, again, that first item provides us great flexibility as staff as we work and analyze bills, because we're just asking for adjustments that accurately reflect performance. IGC is something that we have supported for several years, as I mentioned. And this SAT, ACT test administration, as I mentioned, has a pretty big price tag for Texas. We think that it's going to continue to be an ongoing issue because it's part of our federal accountability system. It's never going to go away. It's not going to be a one-time cost. So we need to ensure that the state is funding that adequately.
And you may not know the answer to this, and this is fine, Mr. Moy or Deb. Any idea what this would cost NEISD?
Mrs. Borman knows.
Oh, Ms. Borman, sorry.
$180,000 annually.
$180,000 annually.
If it keeps going.
Okay, all right, thank you.
That potentially could continue to grow as we have more rigorous math at the lower levels. So you potentially could grow the number of students testing out of Algebra 1, as an example, at the 7th and 8th grade level.
Right,
And we do anticipate those numbers to be larger.
okay, thank you.
And we have 3 from the local control. This was the same 3 that we just presented.
Okay,
The saturation of charter schools, the flexibility in safety and security, and criminal background checks. And that gives us a round number of 10, 4 for school finance, 3 for accountability, and 3 for local control.
Ms. Hughey?
Just for what it's worth, our resolution on the charters brought up a very, very, very robust conversation at the TASB meeting in legislative committee resolutions. They really liked it. They actually wanted it stronger, and several districts, there was discussion of how to word it even stronger. So that was a real good thing done there. So thank you for that, Deb.
Does anybody else have any comments? Ms. Williams or Mr. Wheat?
Go ahead.
I think this is great. I always love it when we have, specific ask, when we either state or federal asks, And just to get, or to be clear on our process, so these bullets will constitute our agenda, and then we'll also have white papers that goes into a little bit more detail, and that might even refer to the current, where some of this might be included in the current bills or any current legislation and any wording, because I find it real easy when we're talking to legislative staff, and that's usually who we're talking to, you know, is the staff. If you come to them with, this is exactly, you know, what we want changed, and here's where you put it, instead of leaving it up, you know, to them to figure out, or this is exactly what the financial impact would be. And, you know, that usually helps really and works really well.
Absolutely. So the white paper, as you mentioned, goes deeper into making the case for the priority. When I am able to, I cite research. For example, you know, why is pre-K a program that's worth investing? There's lots of research out there that shows that. So where I can, I cite research. Where I can, we cite financial data. With regard to the charter school, we have lots of data, and the infographic that we've already created as a district and began to share as part of our story. So yes, the white paper does go into citing the why of the ask, as well as the specific ask or examples.
Thank you.
Mr. Wheat?
Yeah, I know when we had our legislative meeting here with our different legislators, the ones who chose to show up, we talked about the idea that there might be an economic indicator that we could use to connect that would help us with funding. Is there something that we can do with that would, you know, not necessarily be a part of our legislative priorities, but that would be something we could use to sell?
That item specifically about charter schools, or
No, I meant
the economic indicator of a robust school system to the workforce of Texas?
that in some way we could connect funding to whatever economic indicator there was out there, so that if the state is doing well, then the school district should do well. And I think all of the legislators that were there who heard it, who, you know, they actually thought that was a good way to go, that's something they might be able to sell. Whatever economic indicator it is, that way we would know that funding should go up when the economy is going up, and funding might go down if the economy is going down, and that we don't have anything connected to that right now. But I thought all of the people there, most of whom were not on the Republican side, were actually listening to us, actually thoughtful about that, and thought that could have some traction.
Mm-hmm. We can definitely work on some specific examples. Do you have any on the top of your head?
C.P.A, I think, right?
The one that we talk about the most is the simple CPI for the state of Texas. The comptroller, the two federal CPI numbers are for the Dallas area and the Houston area. And the comptroller basically averages those two numbers and calls that the Texas CPI. And as you stated, there are years when the economy was not as robust, say after 2008, where we actually saw in Texas price deflation. So there's a chance that could come back to hers. But this past year, we're looking at 3%. And we just provided our employees a 1% raise and a 1% retention. So, you know, in terms of buying power, they should be expecting less buying power despite that we're giving a raise. What the legislature needs to understand is when you're 87% salaries and benefits, that when you do not provide funding adequate to maintain their salaries to even keep up with inflation, that yes, you are providing your employees a real, not constant, but a real, and a constant dollar, basically a pay cut. Mm-hmm. So that's what mainly we were thinking about tying it to.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so next step.
I guess one of my questions is, are there any wording or wordsmithing that you would like to do at this time? Mrs. Hughey brought up that there was some discussion at TASB, and if there's any wordsmithing over the next week or so, maybe getting that to Dr. Gottardy so that it can be reflected in the October 8th presentation.
Were these top 10 weren't in the presentation that you emailed to us, right?
They weren't. I decided to add them this afternoon when I thought I probably am going to get that question from Mrs. Grona about what am I going to recommend. So they were added at the last minute, but I will be happy to give you a revised presentation.
You have ESP. Okay, that would be great. So if you send that to us, then everybody can look over it and then provide comments or feedback back by,
October 1. Gives us a week to prepare it, to get it for the board agenda, and get it back to you in time for the October 8th board meeting.
okay?
Is that fair? Is October 1st fair?
And could I suggest too that maybe when we're at TASB at our classes and things, if we kind of listen and see if we can pick up ideas and, I mean, I know the charter thing, it struck a particular number of districts in personally, so that's why they liked it, but I'm curious to hear when we're at TASB what other districts are talking about for their legislative agendas too. So if we can kind of all mesh our ideas.
I just had a client make that very recommendation to me, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have something else, Ms.
I
Williams?
was just going to comment, I'm always a kind of a hard action verb type of person. So whenever we could kind of make it a little stronger, whereas instead of saying, you know, support, but, you know, conduct a study or, you know, some type of hard verb where we expect some action.
Okay.
Can do.
All right. Anybody else? Thank you very much, Deb, for all of your work on this. And we will be back in touch, right?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you again.
Yes.
Okay. We, item 4, we're now going to adjourn into executive session pursuant to the following sections of the Texas Open Meetings Act. Texas Government Code Section 551.071, private consultation with the board's attorney. 551.072, discussing purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property. 551.074, to discuss personnel or to hear complaints against personnel. And our board self-evaluation. And the time is 6:08. Thank you, staff, for being